Have you ever used a piece of tech that you just fell in love with and you dreamt about it ever since the first day of use? You just want to take that piece of tech everywhere with you and you're just absolutely enamored by it. That's exactly what I experienced with Canon's 70 to 200 millimeter L series lens. Definitely one of the most beautiful lenses that I have ever used. I think I may have overdone it in Scotland, but that's what we're going to talk about today. I've got some thoughts on it, some good, maybe some bad. Let's talk about it. Now, this video is by no means a comprehensive review of the pros and the cons of this kind of lens. It's simply just my experience, what I really enjoyed about this lens and taking it overseas and just having it with me day in and day out for a total of 12 days. So that's kind of what I'm going to share with you today. And if anybody's just wanting some kind of first time experience with the lens and what was your first impression, this is essentially what I would tell you. So first off, I will preface this video by saying I do not own the 70 to 200. It was a lens that before I left overseas on my travels, definitely one that I wanted to have in my camera bag just because I had shot with the 24 to 70 before. I currently only own prime lenses right now, just doing a little bit of an exploration on the kind of millimeter and focal lengths that I would like to use. And so after using a 24 to 70 earlier this year and renting it out, I found myself stuck at 70 and wanted to go past that. So I thought over in Scotland, especially because of the landscapes, I already have a 35 and a 16 to 24. Let me just take something that can cover a little bit more of the range. And so I decided to rent a 70 to 200. All the reviews were looking very positive. Aside from the weight, obviously, I was very excited about this lens. And I got it and I was obsessed with it. That's pretty much all I ended up using in Scotland. Now, for me, I do particularly love detailed shots. I know a lot of times people like to go wide angle, set the context, and yes, that's super important. But for me, there's something about details, and maybe it's just the season of life right now that I'm in, but I just love focusing on details and getting a lot of those cinematic shots that you really cannot get with the typical 35 millimeter. This lens gave me everything I needed. I did go into this knowing that I was going to make a short film, and so definitely having my wide angle options already available to me and easy to pack and take over, I figured let me just make a little more room for a 70 to 200. I didn't know it at the time, but I also really enjoyed the 70 to 200 because aside from the up closeness of these shots, it tends to make the shots a little bit more personal, and that's something that I certainly wanted to achieve with this particular short film and really all the content that I walked away with from that trip. On a more practical level, the 70 to 200 was definitely a little bit more easier in capturing landscape shots that were particularly far away. There's a lot of walking involved on this trip, and it was really nice to be able to see something off in the distance and actually just zoom in, take a shot of it. I could have used the drone as well, but the drone that I have only has a 24 and a 70 millimeter. I'm shooting with the DJI Air 3, and so yeah, that gives you somewhat of a compression, but not as well as the 70 to 200. And so I didn't find myself using the 200 a whole lot. I hovered somewhere around the 100 millimeter point. And so just having that versatility to be able to zoom in on those shots that were just a little bit off in the distance and I didn't really feel like walking to it, just really gave me a different vantage point. And also with wildlife, it's certainly not a 600 millimeter, which is what you would typically need to get those really up close personal shots of wildlife. But there were certainly a lot of times where we ran into a lot of, wildlife like birds and elk, where the 200 gave me everything I needed to close that gap and still felt like I was getting a pretty close shot of it. Now, I was able to pair this with the 35, which is what I typically shoot on, a 35 millimeter prime lens. And I think that gave me really all the versatility I need. I didn't find myself wanting anything in between 35 and 70. Again, only because I was going there with the intention of coming back with footage for a short film and having the vision and everything drawn up. Those two focal points were just everything I needed. So the 70 to 200, I'm in love with. And I think just to cover my bases, the 16 and the 35, what I currently shoot with now, aside from that zoom lens that I had, was everything I needed for that kind of trip. As far as the color goes, obviously a lot of that is due to the actual camera that I'm shooting on, which is the Canon R8. But I found that the crispiness was definitely there for the 70 to 200. And I almost felt like the colors that came through were just kind of like, it was not oversaturated or lacking. It was kind of middle of the road. So in post-production, I can take it either direction. But I was actually very pleased with the color science that came through that lens, or that came from that lens. Now, obviously, having been there for a short film, there were a lot of diegetic sounds that I was trying to capture. I had my mic going in every direction. I think One slight concern that I had, especially since I wanted to sit in a lot of scenes just in silence with the camera still, just kind of focusing on the subject, I was a little fearful of the sound of the motor just focusing in and out. And I gotta admit, it wasn't bad at all. In fact, I went back through every single clip since then. It's been a journey. I've been back through every single clip since then, and every time when you're watching the motor focusing in and out, especially with different with birds or flowers coming into focus, and my mic, none of that was picked up. And so safe to say, the motor is really not as loud as I anticipated. So that's definitely a pro for this lens. Now, there's only two watch outs that I would really give to anybody who's thinking about renting or even buying this lens. And these are definitely not detrimental to the choice of this lens. In fact, given the option right now, if I can go purchase it, I certainly would. But the only two things that I would just caution anybody is, the obvious one is the weight. So if you're looking into purchasing or renting this, just know that if you pair this with any heavy mirrorless camera, especially some flagship camera. Lucky for me, like I said earlier, I was able to travel with the Canon R8, and so that is already a small and compact camera. So you pair that up with the weight of the 70-200, it wasn't all that bad. I definitely had a lot of accessories on it and clips for my backpack that I was able to utilize in order to kind of give my hands a break whenever I was not shooting. Definitely the weight is something to consider, especially if like you're maybe using it for wedding photography or just something where you're constantly having the camera in hand. It can get a little heavy and taxing on your hands. Now, it did not happen often, but like I said earlier, I did pair it with the 35. There were certainly times where I did not have a lot of flexibility with changing lenses. And so this goes with any focal length, but after a while, if you're using a certain focal length and you'd like to switch it up a little bit, you know, the 70 is really not going to give you those macro shots. That's the minimum that you can actually zoom out on. And so 70-200, while it is a super great focal length and one for detailed shots and up close nature shots that you might want to take, definitely I found myself at some points just not being able to reach for my 35 because of whatever situation we were in. We were hiking, it was hailing on us, whatever, the weather there was crazy. Not being able to go below 70 kind of hurt me sometimes, but that's obviously not one reason that I would deter anybody or myself from even purchasing it. That's why you get different lenses, for versatility of range. Now, like I said, I did have to return that a day or two after I got back from Scotland. It was a sad moment for sure. As a daily driver, I think 15-35 and then a 70-200, that's kind of like the dream combination I'm at right now, just because I do love the short focal ranges, you know, between a 15-35, but then also the long ranges of 70-200. That would give me pretty much everything I need. So yeah, as I'm kind of building up my dream arsenal and weapons of choice, I think the 70-200 range is up there, especially for my style of photography and video and just the details that I like to take. Also, the compression that you get from a lens like this when you're focusing on a single subject is pretty cool. It's pretty awesome. So those would be all the good reasons why I would even recommend probably even just trying it out if you haven't already. Definitely one worth trying out. I think I rented from Lens Rentals, and they're obviously not sponsoring this video, but that's kind of where I go to actually rent all my my camera gear from if I ever need something for an event or a trip like that and I just don't have it in my camera bag. That was my cursory review, my experience, if you will. Not a thorough review. Maybe I'll get to do that one day in the future, but that was my experience with the 70-200 in Scotland. Certainly a lens worth taking on your trips, maybe even in your own backyard. And maybe one day I'll reunite with the 70-200. Maybe one day. But until then, we'll see you guys in the next one.